All right. Thank you, Dominic. Great job talking about all the various design aspects. So now I'm going to talk about some other additional design considerations specific to wood shops. So one, you know, that I'd like to spend a minute or two talking is total cost of ownership. So there are many people who can quote a dust collector, a bag house, ductwork, etc. But it's important to kind of take some of these variables into consideration. So number one is energy costs. Oftentimes, uh, the total cost of your system will include a bag house or dust collector, ductwork and hoods, and a fan. Those are kind of the basic system components, as Dominic talked about. But there's a few things that we can do to look at energy costs. One is putting a VFD or a variable frequency drive on your fan. And so what that does is even though your fan may be rated for the total CFM or volume requirement of your shop, if you happen to be not using half your pickups and those blast gates are closed, the VFD can lower the speed of your fan so it maintains velocity without pulling the same amount of air volume and essentially uses less power during that time period. So that's an important way to save energy costs. You can also do this depending on how you set up your filter cleaning system because you're using compressed air. That air compressor uses power to keep your air header full. So depending on the timing and settings, and ideally set up your filter cleaning timer board on clean on demand mode. There's a few things that we can do to reduce your energy costs overall. Freight and installation, of course, is a factor, especially nowadays with gas prices and fuel prices going up. It's important to look at that up front. So when you do your CapEx budget, you include freight for the bag house, the cyclone, if you have one, control panel, ductwork, and so forth. Replacement filters. Um, Everybody wants to know how often should I change the filters? So the correct answer to that question, unfortunately, is it depends on how you're loading the filters, how often you're using them, etc. So a small shop that's operating on one shift might change their filters every couple of years. Uh, High volume production shop with a lot of dust that's really working their filters hard might have to change those filters every 6 months. It just depends how they're operating. There's a few things we can do to extend that. So first of all, of course, making sure you have the correct filter media, high quality filters to start with, making sure your filter cleaning system and timer board settings are correct so that you are cleaning your filters not too much, but enough to keep the dust cake from building up and keep your differential pressures under control. The other thing specific to wood shops, and you commonly see in wood shops, is putting a cyclone pre-separator upstream of your baghouse. So what this does is it gets all the heavy dust out of your system through the cyclone before it hits the filters. So this significantly reduces the load, the dust load on the filters. It's a higher cost up front because you got to put the cyclone in there, but over time you're saving costs on uh, replacement of filters. Maintenance costs, this is one of those things that you should be planning on up front. So it's always better to be proactive and schedule and budget for maintenance activities, including filter changes, inspections, that's this kind of thing, rather than waiting until something seems to be going wrong in your system, because that tends to be when things get expensive. Product and device useful life. So a properly designed dust collection system for a wood shop should last for many years, decades, without having to replace any of the major components. A lot of this is going to depend on ensuring that it's designed correctly up front. So correct sizing, correct motor sizing, velocity through the ductwork, all these type of things, as well as making sure that it's maintained. So changing your filters when they require it, making sure that your pulse cleaning system is well maintained, diaphragm, valves, timer board connections, solenoids, all these things are replaced and maintained properly to make sure that overall your cost of ownership is lower. Next slide is remote monitoring. So um, something that we offer now is systems for monitoring your system performance and the status of your equipment using connected sensors. So whereas the old school baghouse system just had a differential pressure gauge, you go out there, check the analog dial to see how things were doing, physical inspections and so forth. Now there are relatively low-cost sensors that you can put in place for differential pressure, for airflow, for your fan bearings. All these kind of things can be monitored remotely. So you can tie those into your central control system. If you have one, you can send this up to the cloud to generate reports regularly and alerts when something is going outside the limits, or we can even remotely monitor it for you and give you an alert when something needs to be addressed. For example, your differential pressure goes high, indicating that your filters need a change, or your fan vibration is trending high, indicating that the fan needs to be balanced, or maybe the bearings need to be swapped. It's much better to invest in this upfront rather than wait until the system goes down. Then you have unplanned overtime, you need to scramble for parts and so forth. So predictive maintenance, remote monitoring is kind of the wave of the future for dust collection systems and all kinds of industrial systems. So we encourage you to, look closely at that. Regulatory considerations. So this is, if you are operating a business in the United States, of course, you are subject to OSHA. They have a general duty clause, which basically says that you have to make sure that your shop is safe for your workers to be in. And relevant to a wood shop, of course, that has to do with dusty atmosphere and combustible dust. So NFPA, going to the next slide here, the newest uh, iteration is NFPA 660 for combustible dust. This new revision or release incorporates a bunch of stuff that was in different NFPA standards before, including 664, which was specific for woodworking. Uh, I won't go into all the details. Every case is kind of specific. So that's why it's important that you bring in a consultant or call someone who knows and is familiar with NFPA to make sure that you get the right equipment and design elements in your system. So we would encourage you to call us. If you have a new system or you're retrofitting a system to get compliant, give us a call. Speaking of combustible dust, so the basic requirements, generally speaking, to meet NFPA requirements are you need to have explosion isolation. So if you look at the photo, you can see there's a red valve in the ductwork there, upstream and downstream of the bag house. So if you're returning air back into the building or your dust collection system is inside the building, you have to have an explosion isolation valve on both sides, the exhaust air as well as the inlet side. If you're exhausting to the atmosphere outside, you only need it on the inlet side. The idea there is that, like, if there's a fire or explosion in the bag house, this valve slams shut. It prevents the flame from traveling back into the workspace. You also need to have an NFPA rated airlock or drum kit or something like that at your dust discharge to make sure that the explosion is isolated there as well. The second requirement is explosion venting. So rather than allow your bag house or the cyclone to turn into an uncontrolled bomb, the explosion vent basically just gives it a safe passage for that explosion pressure wave and fireball to exit the bag house in a safe direction. So this typically would need to be pointed somewhere in a safe direction that's not accessible by your employees. There's also explosion vent deflectors you can put on there so it deflects it up and away from personnel. And then finally, you have fire prevention requirements. Usually that comes in the form of a spark detection and water extinguishing system, or a mechanical fire break shutter, or some kind of a chemical suppression system. So those are the three big elements that are required in any dust collection system doing combustible dust. So if you have a wood shop, you're most likely required to comply with these. Oftentimes, you may be able to negotiate or collaborate with your local fire marshal regulator. If you have some special case to determine what makes sense in your case, the default is always to point back to the NFPA guidelines, and that's pretty much what they say. But there's also other requirements in there for housekeeping requirements, risk mitigation, and so forth that you got to be aware of. So it's important. Don't try to wing it. Bring in someone who knows how to be compliant, so you don't get stuck answering, questions by the fire marshal, OSHA inspector, or God forbid, have some kind of a fire that goes awry. And then finally, so, we specialize in dust collection systems. We do woodworking shops all the time. I can name just a few examples here. We did one at Aberdeen Proving Grounds for the U.S. Army a year or so ago. It's a standard mid-size wood shop with cyclone with a cartridge collector. Um, the challenges of these type of projects usually have to do with getting information upfront from our customer. So if we know exactly how many machines, where they're located, what the pickup connection point sizes are, and where the dust collector will be, we're 90% of the way there. We can design a dust collection system based on that. But if we only get bits and pieces of info and we're kind of flying blind, that's where typically the design process takes a bit longer. There's potential changes and so forth. The layout changes, things like that. We find out, oh, actually, we're going to add a few pickups right here. All that impacts our design process. So the more information that you as the customer can provide us up front, the better. Ideally in the form of a layout drawing that shows all of your woodworking equipment, their position and the pickup size. Of course, if you don't have that information, then we can help you gather it up as well. But so we do this all the time. We've done four recent federal government jobs at box shops. We've done high school wood shops, one in is it Simi Valley, I think, in LA County, small wood shops. They all follow a similar process. It's just about figuring out the system size, designing the ductwork, figuring out what the combustible dust requirements are for that system. If it's a big system, we may look at putting a cyclone as well as a fabric filter system, and then we hand off a turnkey proposal for you as a customer to review. So that pretty much sums up the kind of the design approach, the elements of that, combustible dust, all that stuff. So I think at this point, Andy, we're going to move over to Q&A.